Michael Bennett versus the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Who's telling the truth?
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Fight!
I got you. Yeah, I will defend my brothers. I will defend the weak. I will pursue and fight evil so others may sleep. I am the sheepdog, protecting the night. Wolf hunters unite. Bring it on. It's time to fight.
Hey guys, Mike the Cop. Since this channel is all about, in my mind anyway, and where I want it to go, where law enforcement meets culture, there is perhaps no bigger story over the last week that fits that bill than Michael Bennett from the Seattle Seahawks accusing the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department of blatant racism and essentially abuse of force in the process of detaining him during an incident at the Mayweather-McGregor fight. It was a good fight, by the way. It was actually one of the least boring boxing matches I've watched in a while. And it wasn't at the fight itself. It was at a gentleman's club / casino place in Vegas. But I think everywhere's a casino in Vegas, even the freaking airport. Anyway, lots of people are questioning the actions of the police. They're questioning the statement of Michael Bennett, like this guy, for example, out on the YouTube interwebs.
Why didn't the police stop and question any of the many people that rushed by them on their way out of the nightclub and the casino? Why? Why choose to zero in on him? And then why pull the gun?
Yes, let's ask ourselves why. Even though in the end it was determined that there was actually no real threat, that there had been no one with a gun, that no one had been shot, nothing had been fired. That's not the call that the police department responded to. Apparently there was some loud noise that had occurred and people were under the impression that someone may have began firing in a crowd of people. So people were scattering, people were running, people were freaking out, there was confusion. The police were called and their response was to that of an active shooter, whether possible or likely, but as it turned out, imaginary. Nonetheless, their response was that of going to an active shooter. It's a very specific response. Those situations are very dynamic, very tense, and I don't want to make this video about active shooter, but the point is this, is that cops having their guns out at an active shooter response would be the common sense response. To think that that's not going to be the case is at its best ignorant, at its worst clinically insane. Now, onto the claims of Michael Bennett in this whole situation, who had happened to be detained by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. There are two particular officers apparently in question about their treatment verbally of Michael Bennett and physically of Michael Bennett in the process of detaining him as a possible suspect in this crime that they're responding to. Relatively no one had heard of this incident on a broad scale until Bennett released on his Twitter account a letter addressed to the world, so I mean that's a lot of people, in which he, let me boil down the key paragraph of what he's asserting here, so read along with me. On Saturday, August 26, 2017, I was in Las Vegas to attend the Mayweather-McGregor fight on my day off. After the fight, while heading back to my hotel, several hundred people heard what sounded like gunshots. Like many of the people in the area, I ran away from the sound looking for safety. Las Vegas police officers singled me out and pointed their guns at me for doing nothing more than simply being a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Bennett's main assertion is that what is at issue here is him being singled out for nothing other than the color of his skin. More on this and other key points in the letter in a little bit. He then follows up this claim after a few days with a picture, a still picture of him asserting that a gun was held to his head and that he was told that he was going to get effing shot, essentially. What I believe he says in his letter is, blow my effing head off. Here's the picture that he posted on his Twitter account. Again, we'll come back to this because I don't know that that's a gun that's in this officer's hand or a taser. It does appear to me on the surface to be a taser at this point, but again, I can't quite tell from this image. But as Mr. Bennett has already admitted in the opening of his letter, there was a confusing situation going on in which people thought gunshots had gone off. He goes on to imply also that his rights may have been violated. I'm not exactly sure which ones he believes were violated because he doesn't articulate that in the letter, but he does say, I kept asking the officers, what did I do? and reminding them that I had rights, that they're duty bound to respect. The officers ignored my pleas and instead told me to shut up. So I don't understand exactly which rights he thought or is claiming were violated, and if that was like the right to remain silent and they told him to shut up, sounds like it worked out. But Mr. Bennett was not placed under arrest, so I wouldn't have imagined that Miranda rights were read. He then was placed in the back of a police car for what he says felt like an eternity. How long it was, I don't know. I've heard around 10 minutes. That is part of like the 120 some videos and information that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is following up on in their investigation into these allegations of mistreatment or racism. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was quick to respond to the letter once it became public. I gotta say, I respect how fast they came out to address the situation, and it's interesting to me that he notes there was no formal complaint made. There is no reason to think that he had to have made a formal complaint while he was in town, but he did not do so. They did not have any awareness of this situation or this complaint in terms of the interaction specifically with Mr. Bennett until this letter was made public. Here is the synopsis stripped down in video format from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department.
An active shooter call came into the LVMPD Communications Center that originated outside of the Dre's nightclub at the Cromwell. As officers entered the casino floor, they were met with large groups of people running for cover, laying on the ground hiding, and people screaming. With very little information as to who the shooter was or the shooter's location, our officers pushed past the fleeing crowds. As they moved towards the nightclub, an individual later identified as Bennett was seen crouched down behind a gaming machine as the officers approached. Once Bennett was in the officer's view, he quickly ran out of the south doors, jumped over a wall onto Flamingo Road east of Las Vegas Boulevard into traffic. Due to Bennett's actions and the information the officers had at the time, they believed Bennett may have been involved in the shooting, and they gave chase.
This essentially reiterates what I opened with, lays the groundwork for the situation that the police officers were responding to, and what interaction they were aware of at that time based on the reports of what happened with Mr. Bennett. There's also body cam footage of the incident. I want to show you a still shot first, because in that still shot, you can see that people that are around the officers responding, at least this particular group of officers, because I'm sure there were more, there are other black individuals that are running past the officers, that are present there, that are not being singled out. And there are black officers as part of the responding units that are showing up to this situation. Just note that there are other African Americans in the vicinity that are not being singled out. That takes us to the next section. This little video clip shows one of the officers making note to the others that someone had taken off running. Check it out.
One running! One running! One running! Come back!
Where's he run?
Where'd he go?
What is he wearing?
He's get back!
Does he have a gun on him?
Over there! Over there!
What, move.
The reason, according to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, that Mr. Bennett was singled out was because he had been seen crouching behind a machine, took off running when in sight of the police officers. It caught their attention. He jumped over a wall and toward traffic. Again, possible suspicious behavior for that situation. They detain him at that time. A couple officers give chase, put him into handcuffs, and then this is when obviously the dispute is taking place about how he was treated or why he was detained. I'm a big proponent in looking at things as objectively as possible, and when situations like this arise, give it a little time for the information to come to light, for all the facts to be viewed. Because if you're a person who just wants to believe in partial truths, you're really risking the integrity of your ability to have an actually informed opinion. What should win out here? Feelings and perceptions about the situation, or facts regardless of our internal biases that we may bring to the table? I think you know which one I would choose. Now let me be very clear. I don't want to slam Michael Bennett. He may actually believe what he wrote. I really hope he did. versus just straight up lying about it and slandering other human beings. I hope that he's not defaulting to some false notion of racism instead of just acknowledging that police officers were just doing their jobs. Because after all, that would be hypocritical. He doesn't want people singling him out because of his race. Why would anybody else want to be singled out because of their race or their job? Perhaps he's had some terrible experiences in the past, and that shapes his worldview or how he perceives law enforcement or how he perceives anyone outside of his own race. Perhaps he was conditioned in some way environmentally or through his experiences that I'm unaware of that shape this inherent distrust of the police or authority in general. I don't know. These are things I could only speculate about, and I don't pretend to know his situation. I also willingly acknowledge that I don't know what it's like to be Michael Bennett. I don't know what it's like to be a black man. I do not know what experiences, negative or positive, that Bennett has had with law enforcement previous to this, or what specifically shaped that worldview he may hold despite his enormous success, well due to him because of his hard work and talent. Yet he still sees a situation in which he believes he was viewed as what he says is nothing more than a N-word. His words, not mine. I can only speculate about Michael Bennett, but what I do know in my experience is that I have also been the direct victim in my professional career of racism. I've been called terms that are racist. I've been treated differently simply because the color of my skin, and not only the color of my skin, the color of my uniform. The fact that I have a uniform. Should my solution be to tell the world that all of the people who have done that to me, whatever their race, whatever their color is, whatever their national origin, their ethnicity is, that all of them mean there's no equality in this country, mean that they're all racist? And yes, I'm aware that a uniform isn't a race. But in this case, it goes to prove the point. Why? Because those who detained Bennett were not just your average privileged white males, they were men of Hispanic origin. And that is, as you know, a minority. Listen carefully, because where racism exists, as it is expressed by an individual, by a business, by a corporate structure, whatever that is, where it exists, it needs to be called out, it needs to be rooted out, it needs to be battled against, it needs to be called what it is, and that's fine by me. You have a friend and a champion in me in that. But to assert that there is somehow on a national level, okay, or at the level of the entire Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, somehow this systemic racism that is so prevalent that rather than focus on actually going to the source of an active shooter, they chose to just default to picking on someone for no other reason than that they are black. That, my friends, is simply not the case here. It's in fact utter nonsense. He may truly believe this. Bennett may believe that's exactly what happened, but does the objective information available to us indicate that that's what really was at play? Not at all. There are allegedly, again, some 120 videos, plus the witness statements that I'm sure that they're collecting or have collected as a part of seeing, did these officers engage in improper behavior? Even if everything about it was fine, but the way that they spoke to Bennett, the way that they handled it was incorrect, hey, I believe that they should be disciplined according to how they have agreed to follow policies and procedures. That doesn't mean that they're racist, though. And the evidence, as it has been portrayed to us, as it has been provided to all of us, me and you equally, simply does not line up with Mr. Bennett's assertions. People will latch onto something simply because it's Bennett, simply because someone says, well, this is what happened, so they're a famous person, so it must be true. I mean, after all, Bennett says he didn't do anything, so that must mean everything else Bennett says is true.
I wasn't doing nothing. I wasn't doing nothing, man. You ain't asked me a question.
But people get so committed to their position that they will refuse to acknowledge facts. Look at this tweet, for example, that Michael Bennett retweeted. Someone who's saying, even if this is not a gun, it still proves that a gun was to his head. I mean, this is asinine. If it wasn't a gun, it wasn't a gun. If it was, it was. And we can determine later, was there justification for pointing a gun at someone? The head, the body, it's all irrelevant, right? If a gun was an appropriate response and there was any reason to have that out or pointed, then so be it. If there wasn't, so be it. But we can't be so committed to our biases ahead of time that we refuse to acknowledge the facts. Continuing on, I want to finish going through some of the things that Bennett asserts in this letter. He goes on to say, "The system failed me. I can only imagine what Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, and Charlena Lyles felt." Let's knock these down. Eric Garner was engaged in illegal activity and made the choice to resist arrest. You were not, as it turned out, involved in an active shooter incident, Mr. Bennett, and were released with an explanation of why you were detained at the time as part of the rapidly evolving investigation. Eric Garner is not the same situation. Michael Brown. He had just robbed a party store with violent aggression against the store owner and then attempted to disarm a police officer and then ignored his commands to stop charging at him. Yeah, remember the whole hands up, don't shoot thing? Remember that was a complete lie that apparently Bennett still believes to be true? Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by a neighborhood watch guy and had nothing to do with the police, so I'm not exactly sure what he's getting at here other than skin color. Tamir Rice, while tragic, was also not about race. It was about a facsimile firearm in public. You did not have a firearm, Mr. Bennett. You did not have a facsimile firearm, Mr. Bennett. So the situation is different. Charlena Lyles had psychiatric problems and charged officers directly with a knife after repeated verbal commands not to. Mr. Bennett, you did none of those things and suffered none of those things. Only you are imposing race upon yourself in this matter. Mike, how can you say that? Well, because a little thing some people understand has no regard for our feelings, and that is facts. Mr. Bennett, you did none of those things. You suffered none of those consequences. Ultimately, if you were mistreated in any way, verbally or physically, then those officers are going to be held accountable for that. But were you singled out because of your race? No other reason. Were you singled out because of that? Based on what we see? Absolutely not. Facts don't care how I feel. I feel terrible when I see one of my brother officers, my sister officers, engaging in something that causes them to be disciplined, that causes them to have lost their job, or to be even prosecuted and jailed. I don't feel good about that, but the facts don't change that it happens, and the facts don't change that it needs to happen. I wish there was no way that anyone who is innocent would ever be detained or mistaken for someone that could have been involved with something, no matter what their color. Keep that in mind before you post your hate comment below. But that's not how dynamic situations work like this. When you're responding to something that is a potentially deadly violent situation, it just doesn't unfold that way. It's not perfect because we don't live in a perfect world. We'll put up a picture of Mr. Bennett here again, and then we'll just put the words up. I need to read most of this, so we'll put him up on the screen, put these little captions up that say these things, and we'll go through it. He goes on to say, "I have always held a strong conviction that protesting or standing up for justice is simply the right thing to do." Pause. Mr. Bennett, you and I, in this letter, agree 100%. Justice is always worth standing up for, because justice is about embracing the truth. Continuing on. This fact is unequivocally without question why before every game I sit during the national anthem, because equality doesn't live in this country, and no matter how much money you make, what job title you have, or how much you give, when you are seen as a N-word, again, his words, not mine, you will be treated that way. Okay, so I see what he's getting at here. I mean, after all, my top-out salary at my most recent department was around $56,000, and Bennett makes, like, in a lot more millions of that. But I see where he's coming from. He's saying that it is important how you are viewed, regardless of what you make. So I think I follow with him there. Right. Mr. Bennett, I respectfully ask you then, how do you view the men and women of law enforcement? Are they merely a uniform to you? Or are they also people equally deserving of a fair chance? Equality doesn't live in this country, sir? Equality doesn't live in this country?
Did anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Sir, this country is the bastion of equality, which is only so because of the men and women who have borne the weight of so many American souls as they fought and died for such freedoms, which you so easily dismiss and disrespect when you sit for our national anthem and disrespect our country's flag. As a police officer, my current and former attorney generals, the chief law enforcement officers in the land, have been black. The man who just completed a background investigation for me for a new police job I have applied to was black. That's right. He has vastly more experience and knowledge than myself, a white man. I wonder if I should feel there is no equality because of this. Tell former President Barack Obama that there is no equality for any person of color that arises to the most powerful political position in the world. In short, Mr. Bennett, spare me. Should more facts come to light that prove that the officers need to be disciplined, I hope that that's the case, and I hope that's what happens. But in all honesty, saying I'm going to shoot your effing head off is a lot better than him actually having been a shooter, and they said, "Sir, are you the one that has a gun?" To wrap this up, the NFL released a statement saying this: Bennett is a leader on his team and in his community. The league said it will support Michael and all NFL players in promoting mutual respect between law enforcement and the communities they loyally serve, and fair and equal treatment under the law. I close with this: the only way to achieve mutual respect is a mutual commitment to the truth. If we choose to cling to false perceptions about racism, to false notions of inequality, to false notions of any form of bias, if we cling to that and we ignore the facts that are staring us in the face, then we won't find any kind of mutual benefit, because one person will always be trying to take advantage of the other.